engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, the Minot State Professional Communications Department proudly brings to you the Striha Sports Podcast with your host, Parker Striha.
Hello and welcome back to the Striha Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and on today's episode, I'm going to be looking at who I think is the greatest NFL running back of all time. I'm by no means a professional, but I do love talking about sports, so thank you for joining me. I want to first give a quick shout out and thank you to KMSU and the Minot State Professional Communications Department for allowing me to continue to use this podcast room and the computer lab to make sure my podcast episodes get done well and they get put out to you guys who choose to listen to it. Even if there are not that many of you, I still appreciate it nonetheless. Like I said, this is going to be me talking through who I think the greatest NFL running back of all time is. I'm sure my logic is very flawed, but it's my logic. It's no one else's. I did all the research for this. Like I said, if it's flawed, it's flawed. Oh well. My four candidates, or who I think the four greatest running backs of all time are, Barry Sanders, Jim Brown, Walter Payton, and Eric Dickerson. That is, of course, in no order. Those are just my four candidates. Those are the guys who I think are the best. No, I did not include Emmitt Smith. I really don't think he was that great. You could put a lot of people behind that 90s Cowboys offensive line, and they would have had similar, if not better, numbers to Emmitt Smith. That is the end of what I have to say about that. He's not on my list. Cowboys fans, cry about it. So the first guy I'm going to talk about is Barry Sanders. He was picked number 3 overall in 1989, and he played until 1998, so 10 seasons, 153 games. In his career totals, he had 3,062 rushes, which was 8th all-time in the NFL, 15,269 rushing yards, which is 4th all-time, and 99 rushing touchdowns, which is 10th all-time. Game averages: in his 153 games, he averaged 20 carries per game, 99.8 rushing yards, and 0.65 rushing touchdowns. And then season averages: he played 10 seasons, and it was 306.2 carries per season for 1,526.9 rushing yards and 9.9 rushing touchdowns. Looking past actual stats and going into his awards and accolades, he was a 10-time Pro Bowler, 6-time first-team All-Pro, 1989 Offensive Rookie of the Year, 2-time Offensive Player of the Year, 1997 Most Valuable Player. He led the league in rushing yards 4 times. He has the 4th most single-season rushing yards, which was 2,053 in 1997, and he is one of only 8 running backs with more than 2,000 yards in a single season. He is also in the Hall of Fame. Moving on to Jim Brown. He was the number 6 overall pick in 1957. He played until 1965, so 9 seasons, 118 games. Career totals: 2,359 rushes, which is 30th all-time, 12,312 rushing yards, which is 11th all-time, and 106 rushing touchdowns, which is 6th all-time. Game averages: in 118 games, he averaged 20 rushes, 104.3 rushing yards, and 0.9 rushing touchdowns per game. And then in his 9 seasons, he averaged 262 carries for 1,368 rushing yards and 11.78 rushing touchdowns per season. His awards and accolades: 9-time Pro Bowler, 8-time first-team All-Pro. He led the league in carries 6 times, led the league in rushing yards 8 times, led the league in rushing touchdowns 5 times. He was a 3-time AP Most Valuable Player, 3-time United Press International Most Valuable Player. He was also the 1957 AP and UPI Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he is a Hall of Famer. Next, I have Walter Payton. He was the number 4 overall pick in 1975, played until 1987, so 13 seasons, 190 career games. Career totals: he is 2nd all-time with 3,838 carries, also 2nd all-time with 16,726 rushing yards, and he had 110 rushing touchdowns, which was 5th all-time. In his 190 career games, he averaged 20.2 rushes per game, 88 rushing yards, and .58 rushing touchdowns. Season averages in his 13 years, he averaged 295.2 rushes per season for 1,286.6 rushing yards and 8.5 rushing touchdowns per game. His awards and accolades: 9-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro, led the league in rushes 4 times, led the league in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns once. He's a 1-time Super Bowl champion, a 1977 Offensive Player of the Year, and 1977 Most Valuable Player. He is in the Hall of Fame, and he is the namesake for the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. My last candidate is Eric Dickerson, who was the number 2 overall pick in 1983, played until 1993, so 11 seasons, 146 games. He had, for career totals, 2,996 rushes, which is 11th all-time, 13,259 rushing yards, which is 9th all-time, 90 rushing touchdowns, which is tied for 13th of all time. Game averages: in 146 games, he averaged 20.5 rushes per game, 90.8 rushing yards per game, and .62 rushing touchdowns per game. And then when you look at season averages, it was 11 seasons for 272.4 rushes, 1,205 rushing yards per season, and 8.2 rushing touchdowns per season. Then moving into his awards and accolades, he was a 6-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro, led the league in carries 3 times, led the league in rushing yards 4 times, led the league in rushing touchdowns once. He was also the 1983 Offensive Rookie of the Year, 1986 Offensive Player of the Year. He's in the Hall of Fame. He was the 2nd player to ever rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, and he is currently the record holder for rushing yards in a season with 2,105 yards in 1984. So, obviously, 4 very great running backs. I'm not going to rank them 1 to 4. I think you can make a strong case anywhere for any of those guys to be the best. I think they all had very great resumes, very great careers. Obviously Eric Dickerson leading or having the NFL single season record for rushing yards and doing it in his 2nd season. Nonetheless, all 4 are Hall of Famers. Jim Brown leading the league in basically every rushing stat for a majority of his career is insane. Some of the stuff you can't see on here, obviously, though, I'm going to look at Barry Sanders specifically and kind of talk briefly about that. Is in stats, you can't see the impact that he had on the field. There's no stat that I know about that involves how many people you juked out, how difficult you were to tackle, how difficult you made defensive players' lives out there. I don't remember who the player was, but I know I'm thinking of one specific play. It was against the Cowboys. I believe it was a run to the right, and Barry broke through, and I believe he was about to get tackled, and then he got out, and he kept going. I'm pretty sure he scored a touchdown, and the main reason I remember that play is there was a Dallas defensive lineman who stood up and was, turning around looking for Barry Sanders. And, you can't quantify that. I don't think that's anywhere near the right word that I'm looking to use, but, there's no stats that talk about stuff like that. I'll just say it now, who I think the best running back of all time is. I think it's Barry Sanders. I know that may be a hot take, but I don't really think it is. I think you give him a couple more years. If he kept playing a couple more seasons, I think he would be more widely regarded as the best running back in NFL history. I know a big argument is you put him behind that Dallas offensive line in the 90s, and his numbers are far surpassing what Emmitt Smith ended up doing behind that offensive line. And while I do think that's true, because I believe Barry was just a more talented overall player and runner of the football, the stuff that he did while in Detroit, nonetheless, behind far worse offensive lines and with far worse talent around him, day in, day out, week by week, I don't think you can really look at Barry Sanders and say he's not anything but the best. I mean, I know my logic is very, very flawed, and it maybe is kind of leaning towards a specific thing on how I did it. I don't really remember. I did a lot of this a while ago and just kind of forgot about it. But yeah, I think Barry Sanders is the greatest running back of all time. I don't like, as a Green Bay fan, that my greatest running back and wide receiver of all time are, both Detroit Lions, but it is what it is. Considering the talent that both of those players had, I don't really think there's an argument that can be made for that. That's just me. Like I said, my logic's probably very flawed. It's just my opinion. I think Barry Sanders, greatest running back of all time. But that is all I have for you guys today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you all next time. Peace.